ikikien dohia nagagwoba igba orewo ve doleji oba ratokpe ise ve no nya re dia wa no ri oba nyado we yin ga gongien ogbawu piyisen ne bori gbigbo hon laido ona gele mu ese ona doje monibun ve ya ve ne mi ga ye ve geni piyisen no gbera ona lado jebe na miewe oba ovorame no gbaisi ne boria be mupa hiotedore edone werae wukpo 1897 odogun awoka o kenemi na ya sunu yunue ovie ihie hion oba diawa ya gwebu hia gwan wagi totania nu waguge doe we no ya sunu he.
And the wall excavated from it were dug without using any mechanical equipment or earth movers. The Benin moat is said to be described by the Guinness Book of Records as the greatest earth-moving work by man, second only to the Great China Wall. Benin also evolved its unique bronze casting method and ivory carving, which produced thousands of priceless bronze and ivory works, now in museums and galleries all over the world. In international trade and diplomacy, Benin reached its zenith between 1504 and 1550 through our great ancestor Oba who maintained diplomatic relations with the King of Portugal, then a major power in Europe, and Benin Portuguese trade was booming. Oba by the way, was the father of Oba of whose military exploits led him through these coastal paths to Dahomey, now Republic of Benin, when, en route and fatigued, he set up a camp, or a coup, in this sandy beach we now call Lagos. The Benin Empire, from Oba of reign, held sway along the west coast until the last decade of the 19th century. In 1897, the British invaded Benin and dismantled the intricate administrative machinery that our kings established. Why did the British do that? The popular account, written by the British themselves, is that some unarmed British officials had set out to visit the King of Benin, my great-grandfather, Oba of Great Benin, and they were waylaid and massacred on the order of the King of Benin. That story was published prominently by British newspapers. They portrayed Benin and their king as bloodthirsty savages, thereby preparing the minds of their public for the war their government was about to wage on Benin. Within 1 month after the so-called massacre, the British assembled a force of 7 warships, 82 Navy officials and regents, 123 officers and men of the British Marines, 9 medical personnel, 29 Indian regiments, plus the Niger Coast Protectorate Army, 250 troops, 1 rocket launcher, 7 cannon guns of the Niger Coast Protectorate, and 150 strong Lagos Hausa troop, as they call them, under the command of one Rear Admiral Rosin. Rosin landed at our port Uoton, now usually spelled in history books as Wato, about 30 kilometers from the city on February 10. The assault had begun. The British launched a 3-pronged attack from our riverine villages of Olobo, Stokmomba, and Uoton. The battle was fierce. Our troops have fought many battles, but they have never fought against cannonballs and rockets. Nonplussed, they must have felt as the Japanese when the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Benin was captured after 8 days. The British descended on the city, burning every house. The Oba Palace was completely burned down. Soldiers ransacked every room and removed all the bronze and every pieces they found that adorned the altars and the halls. They were obviously looking for them, for Philip had written 3 months earlier that enough bronzes and ivory would be found in the palace whose value would offset the cost of the war. The king was indicted for murder of the officials. He was exiled to Calabar, where he spent his last 17 years. The chiefs involved too were tried and executed. New facts have emerged which have made it clear that the war was premeditated and deliberately provoked by the British. The British had planned to take control of the Benin country and trade. You may ask why the British would take all that trouble to establish themselves in that far-flung area in the belly of the rainforest. Those who are familiar with the history of Africa and what is today Nigeria, and I dare say there are many here, will remember that what happened after the abolition of slave trade in the 1880s, when European merchants turned their attention to commodities like spices, granules, palm produce, and rubber in the west coast of Africa. European merchants from different European countries found themselves locked in cutthroat rivalry to gain possession of different parts of Africa. And what is today Nigeria, and I dare say there are many here, will remember that what happened after the abolition of slave trade in the 1880s, when European merchants turned their attention to commodities like spices, granules, palm produce, and rubber in the west coast of Africa. European merchants from different European countries found themselves locked in cutthroat rivalry to gain possession of different parts of Africa. You will recall that in order to check the confusion, the Europeans themselves convened what came to be known in history as the Berlin Conference in 1884, where they agreed that any country that established what they termed spheres of influence anywhere in Africa should claim the area. Thus the real scramble for Africa, as you will recall, started. By that time, of course, the British had taken control of the Niger coast after pushing out the Dutch, who pushed out the Portuguese. Benin contemporary history, including traditional history, recalls how the Europeans, from the time of my great ancestor, Oba SEJ, already mentioned, had been trying to gain access into the hinterland, which they suspected to be very rich of natural commodities. But the powerful kings of Benin did not give them the opportunity. So well after the Berlin Conference, the British merchants entrenched themselves in the Niger coast of what is now Nigeria. And Mr. Galway of Britain visited the palace of the Oba of Benin in 1892. He negotiated some form of treaty with my great-grandfather, Oba of Great Benin, who could neither read nor write, and made him append his signature. In fact, there are doubts up till now as as to whether the Oba really understood the implication of the treaty to which he was made to append his thumb impression, even though the interpreter certified that the Oba clearly understood the terms of the agreement. But available records now show that the interpreter, who was himself semi-literate, also completed the document as the Oba did. We all know that interpreters in those days had questionable proficiency. For example, 40 years after the event, and despite the fact that formal schools had been established, one of such latter-day interpreters interpreted the word selfish in the vernacular literally to mean the act of selling fish. But 2 years after that treaty was signed in quotes, Ralph Moore, another British officer of the Niger coast, swooped on Chief Nana of Ebrahimi and forcibly removed him in 1894. Ebrahimi, the town of Kokona in Delta State, was only a few kilometers from Benin, and Chief Nana was one of Oba of Ora's trading partners. Encouraged by his success in Ebrahimi, Moore sought permission from the colonial office to undertake an expedition to Benin and depose the king. 2 British military officers, Major Crawford and Captain Morley, who were in charge of the army barracks in Sabele, landed in Uwoto with a large number of security carriers and 20 armed constables in September 1895. As there was no prior notice of their intention, Benin soldiers, who had been on the alert since the Nana episode of the previous years, chased them off. Morning alone made another reconnaissance trip through Olobo. He retreated when he also encountered the soldiers en route. With the fate of Chief Nana fresh on his mind, the two attempted by Crawford and Morley to sneak into Benin, and the subversion of trade by British agents, Oba of Great closed all external trade from his kingdom in April 1896. In the summer of that year, Moore went to England on vacation leave. While there, he personally pressed his case for military intervention before Sir Clement Hill, the head of the African section of the Foreign Office. Meanwhile, his deputy, Captain James Philip, was appointed acting consul. Spoiling for military action against Benin, Philip wrote a letter to the Home Office dated November 16, 1896. The letter, in part, reads thus, and I quote, "The King of Benin, whose country is within a British protectorate, and who has signed a treaty with Her Majesty's representative, has deliberately stopped all trade and effectively blocked the way to all progress in that part of the protectorate. The Sheffield traders, a most important and most loyal tribe, whose prosperity depends to a very great extent upon the produce, mainly palm kernel, they can get on the Benin country, have appealed to this government to give them such assistance as will enable them pursue their lawful trade. The whole of the English merchants represented on the river have petitioned the government for aid to enable them to keep their factories open. I therefore ask His Lordship's permission to visit Benin City in February next to depose and remove the King of Benin and to establish a native council in his place and take such further steps for opening up the country as the occasion may require," unquote. But as a postscript, he added, and I quote, "I would add that I have reason to hope that sufficient ivory will be found in the king's house to pay the expenses incurred in removing the king from his stool," unquote. 2 months later, January 4, 1897, 2 yachts landed at Waterton. Philip, 8 other Britons, and about 400 men disembarked. On the next day, Philip sent a local boy to Benin to tell the Oba that he and his party were on their way to visit him. But the Oba was celebrating the festival that we call Agwe, during which it was forbidden for him to receive visitors. Philip was told to go back and return after the festival if he wished to visit the Oba, but he ignored the advice and continued his march on Benin. News came to Benin that the white man was marching on Benin with a large army to capture the king, as they did Nana only 2 years before. The natives hurriedly assembled their men and moved to intercept the advancing British troops. They met the British troops at a village we call Ubine, some 17 kilometers to the city, and in the skirmish that followed, 7 of the 9 Britons were killed. 1 month later, on February 10 precisely, Admiral Rosin landed with the rest of the British army, of which advance party Philip had led. I have already described how they captured and destroyed the city, executed the chiefs, and exiled the Oba. It was a painful event, but on the other hand, we find that out of the rubbles of war, Benin entered the international map through the sale to museums and private collectors of our beautiful works of art in ivory and bronze looted by the British. Furthermore, the event made Benin a pet subject for international historians to this day, and books on Benin now adorn the best libraries. From this point of view, therefore, we considered it necessary to commemorate or even celebrate the event, painful as it was. It is also desirable to commemorate the memory of, and therefore remember, the gallant chiefs and soldiers, loyal subjects of their Oba, who lost their lives in that war, and also of the Oba himself, who, in his desire to protect the trading activities of his people, got himself humiliated and exiled after a trial that violated the acclaimed British justice. On the local side, the grave where the slain British soldiers were interred is preserved and revered to this day.
There is a saying in Benin.
Manedo taiwe agasedo edo yiri. Vajonaka uge nuwawage kawokpawa desin nekhere oeni. Uswimi inwinwizi no saya gwedo nedo yare do noji maka we edo isi agbon we otedona mane huia kekpa mane huia ke fienwo walaho nibu yebede wari gbe koto wari gboriyan koto na ya lele ilele na ya fe ariomo yogwedion erun de manoro pa no be ga en ba u no lele kian walwese wa bi dan ho wa bi uge na
they wish to communicate with.
Kenu ya ba be do ga de o ga